Hello and welcome to everybody tuning in today. I'm Billy Mitchell, Vice President of Content and Community for FedScoop, and it's my pleasure to be joined today by Terry Halvorsen. Terry is the GM and Client and Solutions Development for, let me start that over because I messed that up. In 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to everybody tuning in today. I'm Billy Mitchell, Vice President of Content and Community for FedScoop, and it's my pleasure to be joined today by Terry Halvorsen. Terry is the GM of Client and Solutions Development for the federal and public sector at IBM. Terry, thanks so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Billy, I'm doing well, and thank you. It's good to see you again, and it's
You
good
as
to
well.
see you in an era where we're going to maybe get to open up. So
Exactly. Well, always a pleasure to chat with you, Terry. I'd love to have a conversation today about a variety of things in conjunction with IBM's ThinkGov Summit. And I want to start our conversation with the rate of transformation over the last year. We've seen a lot going on in the federal space in particular. So I'd love to ask you, how has the rate of transformation in the public sector accelerated in the past year? And what do you think drove that?
Well, first, I think we all know the rate of transformation was phenomenally fast anyway. And, I'll be candid, I didn't know that it could get faster, but certainly COVID drove a much greater transformation rate. I mean, when you're thinking about what we were doing before COVID, a lot of face-to-face meetings, people traveling, and that coming to a screeching halt. I mean, it really did. Last year, or 20, I spent like 260 days on the year traveling. So far this year, I've spent 2. I mean, that's dramatic. And we had to respond to that. And I think governments particularly had to respond to that because they were, they had services. So COVID forced them to really readdress their network structure, their architecture, everything from how they were going to conduct business remotely to how they were going to conduct it securely. And I think that that's going to continue past COVID. I mean, I wish I could sit here and say, I think COVID will be the last type of these events. I think that's not true. I think between more COVID-like health events, I think we're going to see that. If you look at the science, that kind of seems to be a prediction. And I think we're just going to see an ever increasing use of mobile communications. I think that fits the current generation of upcoming leaders. They're used to that. They like to deal in that too. So all of those factors really contributed to the continuing increasing rate of transformation. And I think, unfortunately, maybe for some, I think the rate is going to continue to get faster and faster. We're blowing past Moore's Law and everything else. And I don't know how we measure it today. We'll come up with something, but it's going to be faster.
I knew Moore's Law. I like it. Terry, in addition to the pandemic, obviously this past couple months, in the past year, there's been a lot of cybersecurity breaches that have kind of pervaded the national news spotlight. So given all of those new breaches, things like SolarWinds and others, what can public sector organizations do today to better protect their most valuable assets in wake of those breaches?
Billy, this is one of those where history is going to play a big role. I'll still say that the 2 biggest things we need to do are basics. I mean, when you look at this, while we've got advanced attacks like SolarWinds, they are still helped to do more damage because we're not keeping up with basics. And frankly, we're not training the people. They're the 2 things that there are a lot of other things you can do after you get those right. But if you don't really get your basic cybersecurity, your cyber hygiene right, and train your people, you're not going to make progress in this area.
So Terry, you mentioned, that is pretty obvious. This won't be the last pandemic that we will face. There will be other challenges of this scale that will almost certainly impact federal operations the way this one has. So what has the coronavirus pandemic taught governments about what they can do to prepare for the next major crisis?
I think that the first thing, and we talked about in the opening question, is they've got to be ready to embrace working in a mobile environment. And I think hopefully that lesson has become clear with the pandemic, and we'll see governments invest in that area. We'll see them invest in more cybersecurity for a mobile hybrid environment. I think it also told us that you've got to have data near where people need it, and that's got to be pre-staged. In defense, we talk about pre-staging equipment a lot. I think one of the things we're going to have to really look about is pre-staging data in cloud-like mobile data environments that are secure. And I think that's the next big thing that, frankly, both government and industry needs to look at. How do I pre-stage that data in areas where I'm going to need it, and probably erring on the side of putting more data forward than I think I might need, because I think the other thing we know is that data is the gold of today. I mean, it really is. And being able to exploit that data in ways that we haven't thought of, using AI, using modern data management techniques, is going to be key. So improve mobility, getting data securely at the edge, and putting it in ways I can apply tools like AI and other data management techniques to it is going to be key.
That's great. So Terry, as we close out, let's take that concept of mobility a step further in a similar vein. As organizations embrace a new remote work model where things are maybe a little bit more hybrid. Right now they're remote, maybe they'll swing back in the opposite direction. Nobody really knows where it's going to land, but how should agencies and other public sector organizations plan their IT operations to support this new sort of workplace?
Yeah, but I think you're absolutely right. I do think it's going to be hybrid. I mean, I'm looking at things that I have scheduled in advance. We've got more hybrid conferences that are still going to rely on mobility. And you hate to be repetitive in the answers here, but I do think it's about structuring your architecture so that you can shift from, say, a more physical environment to a virtual environment seamlessly. And that takes a change in architecture. Again, you've got to have the data positioned where you can use it. In many cases, we in industry and government are still overwhelmed by the amount of data we've got, not the amount of information, but the amount of data. I think that's the other thing that industry and government are going to have to focus on, is how do they take the vast amounts of data that they have, and in more real time, how do they get that data to become valuable information that they can use to improve services, improve business, and that the whole time making sure that they're thinking about the security of that data. And if you're in the services business, we've got to start really embracing privacy as part of the role of security.
Terry, it's always a pleasure to catch up with you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Good to see you again. And maybe in the near future, we'll get to do this live at one of these up and coming events.
Absolutely. I look forward to it.
Thank you.